Okay.
Okay, so I guess we can call the meeting to order at 2:03 on Wednesday, April 8th. And we're doing this remotely. It looks like, Hollywood Squares or something here. How many of you guys have done meeting? I know Mike's done some meetings like this. Other people, are you guys all? Okay, cool. So I think the biggest thing is just make sure we don't talk over each other. So yeah, I think that's kind of the biggest thing. And I really wanted to start out by expressing appreciation for Carly and Summer and all the city staff of doing so much to make sure we can actually still function right now. So I think that's great. And thank you very much. So we have, I don't know if I have the most current agenda in front of me, but we called the meeting to order. I do not remember, I personally did not read the minutes. I'm sorry. Did people read the minutes, and do we have minutes?
We had minutes this.
Okay.
Sorry about that. We're a little reduced in force, so the minutes might be delayed these next couple months.
Okay. And then I know the citizens to be heard portion of the meeting isn't going to happen right now because of the complication and extra workload that gives to staff. So we'll leave that be. So I guess we have board and staff reports at this point.
Oh, and Madam Chair, actually, I'm so sorry. I didn't let you know this before because we realized it just on Monday. We need, this was an addendum to the agenda, and I can pull it up too and share on the screen if that helps. Is to adopt electronic
yes,
meters, which we are allowed to do given the governor's order, even though we don't have any right now. We can adopt them at this meeting. So,
okay, we need to start by adopting that.
Yeah, and we'll just get that out of the way, and I can pull up. Would everyone like to review them? I can. Yeah, okay. I will share my screen with you in just a minute. Let me see.
Carly, if it helps, I also attach them to the meeting invite, the agenda, and the addendum, if that helps.
Yes.
That's handy. Oh, I gotta turn that off.
So, and I have them pulled up too. Can you see my screen, everyone?
Yes.
Great. This is actually pretty straightforward. There's not much in the way of it's pretty just what you think it would be. We define the anchor location, the remote location, and one thing that will happen is anytime you take a vote, the recorder Summer will do a roll call for you, just so we can hear exactly who it is. It's and for today, I think this is the only roll call vote that we would have to do because this is the only thing you're probably taking official action on. But so it's pretty straightforward. But like basically, you behave the same way as you usually do, except that you're electronic.
Okay, and sorry, I just confused myself by opening something. Anyway, okay. Do people want to discuss this or just move on with adopting it?
Well, I have a question. I have one question. I think I watched the city council's discussion on this too, and I forget exactly what happened. And my question is, what if one person can't make it and everybody else can make what is the term? The anchored site. Can we use this also for that?
Yes. So this allows, I believe, for a non-anchor location or an anchor location, I believe. Let me see.
And I thought, aren't we going to be revisiting this after we where we can have meetings again? Because I thought that's what I heard the city council say, is not to just adopt this forever, but we're going to need to revisit it.
Yes, that is true. That is what you can do. yeah, this doesn't have to be set in stone. What it basically allows you to do right now is operate during, it's not just for this emergency situation, but you can revisit and say, we want to modify it because it's not working. But I don't know that it does require, I don't think it does not allow an anchor location because that is defined. It says that it's appropriate if you do not have an anchor location for you to still hold a meeting. It can be totally remote. I believe.
Because personally, I would rather not have us getting in the habit of having to do this at a meeting once we have the capacity to meet in person again. Because it's one thing doing it with all of us right now, but if we have 4 of us in the meeting and then we're having to do this too, it's a different dynamic that I think is very hard to manage.
Yeah.
So I personally would like to make sure we revisit this once we can meet in an anchor location again. And not to say I never want to do it. I just don't want it to be the accepted, oh yeah, you can do that instead. And then people just don't come.
Yeah.
Though I have to admit, it's nice to sit at my desk and drink my water and just, you know, hang out at home. So.
So Carly, I'm not sure you answered my questions. If we were meeting at an anchor location and one person wanted to join the meeting electronically, does this actually allow for that?
I'm trying to see for the procedure, which requires notice. It doesn't, I don't believe it disallows that.
I don't think it disallows that. That's correct. I'm sure it doesn't.
Yeah.
Carly, if I may, I believe the bylaws for the water board actually allow for remote participation currently. So this just allows for everyone to participate remotely. But your bylaws do allow for electronic participation if one person or 1 or 2 people are missing at an anchor location.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Summer. I'm also glad to hear somebody found our bylaws.
I did.
Yeah, the bylaws do not have the procedure, which this is providing. Like it's allowed, but there's no procedure outlined, which state statute requires. It requires both the allowance and procedure. So this is sort of the other half of the equation for it.
Okay. Are you ready for a motion, Cara?
I'm sitting here.
I motion to approve these electronic meetings as it stands.
I will second.
Do a motion in a second. Any further discussion? Whoa, y'all vanished. Where'd you go?
I should be back. I just removed my I stopped sharing my screen.
So this one, Summer, we have to do a voice vote where you
Roll call vote. Yep. So I will call on Denver. Unmute. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. And your vote?
Yes, aye, whatever.
Okay. Jeremy.
Aye.
Laura.
Hi.
Arnie.
Aye.
Mike.
Aye.
Did I get everyone? Okay.
So I can't see everybody, so I'm having a hard time now.
Up on
So
the right.
Cara, if you go up to the top right hand of your screen, you can see there's different views where you can change your view.
No, everybody vanished on my computer. Everybody's gone. The whole screen. I can hear y'all, but the whole screen that had y'all here is gone.
Re-click the Zoom button on the bottom.
I don't have a Zoom button on the bottom, but I have a Zoom button on the side, so that works. Thank you. I don't know where y'all went. I didn't do it. All right, so let me find the agenda again on my other screen. So the rest of the agenda, Carly, is the same as the one I have before me that didn't have that.
Yes, correct.
So the next topic is board and staff reports. Glad to see Arnie is up and about. That's great.
I'm up. I'm not very much about right now, but I'm up.
I don't think any of us are very much about right now.
This is true.
So if we don't have any board or staff reports, should we move on?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I might add, I mentioned this to Carly at a city council meeting the other night, a leftover item of business for us at some point, not now, because staff is so swamped with so many other things that are more important, I still, in my mind, at least would like to expand our charter, if you will, from just a water conservation organization to one that's interested in water supply and other subjects as well, which we've historically been doing. And that all seemed like a very important topic until all these other events hit. So I don't want to burden staff at this point with making those changes, but I do want to make sure, Carly, that it kind of stays on my hit list, if you will. I mean, if we will, when we get around to it, okay? It could be a while.
Yeah. Well, and that's where I think the next item on the agenda of going over how we're going to move forward with a water conservation plan update, we can help make sure we include that in that list, because I'm kind of envisioning that resulting in a task list for us for the coming 6 to 12 months, maybe. Does that seem, would that work for you, Mike?
Yeah.
Okay. Should we move on to the next agenda item then, which is the water conservation plan update process? Or is there anything anyone else wants to talk about as far as a report?
Eric, do you have any staff reports for us?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, no, not much going on.
Okay. So Carly or Summer, did you get the PowerPoint I put together and emailed you guys earlier today? Because that
I have it, and I can. I know you probably can't see your screen. I can use it from my screen, and you can just tell me when to flip a slide. Would that be helpful if I shared it with the group?
That'd be great if that works.
Let's see how that goes. Bear with me. I'm going to share my screen again.
I figured this would be a way of helping us all walk through some of these documents together since we can't be in the same room. So bear with us as we figure this out, because I figured this would be a little bit of a learning curve. And I have the luxury of having the whole thing in front of me. There we go. So I just threw something together really quick with a few things to help jog our memories of things. And if you just go on to the next one. If I remember correctly, Carly, we're supposed to have this update completed by 2021, correct?
One sec. Can you hear me? Sorry, am I muted? Oh, I'm not.
Yes.
I'm muted, or you can hear me?
I can hear you.
Sorry, I can't see because I'm sharing my screen.
Oh, right. Sorry.
So by 2021 is when we normally would, although they have extended to 2022 if we
okay.
do that.
Okay.
Question?
Yes.
By the close of 2021 or the beginning of 2021?
That's a very good question. So typically it is due in August by 2021 for review by DWR, by the Department of Water Resources, to ensure we're compliant. And then I believe there's like either we have to pass it by that date or there's a final passage by December required by the City Council, but it has to go through a review by DWR ahead of time.
Okay. Thank you.
So to kind of jog everyone's memories, I just threw up the table of contents from the current plan. And I don't know if people have had a chance to take a look at this, read through it. If there's things you are all ready to talk about as far as what's missing, what's unnecessary, what really needs improvement. I have a series of slides going through all these questions. So if you have anything, great. And if you don't, we can move on to the next slide and just work through it all. It's up to you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Cara, I would guess just looking at the table of contents, it looks pretty straightforward.
Yep.
The main thing would be updating documents that provide data sources that are included in here. For example, water use trends, current use per capita, all this population and data, so forth, that when those documents are updated, we certainly ought to fold them into this guy. And other than that, I'm not looking for, I don't think, any radical change in what the plan would look like. Is that correct?
Well, I think there's some things that are just, staff need to collect information or, go through these and make sure things are still current, that kind of thing, which is kind of all this stuff in blue. And then we have the things that we might really be looking at as far as water conservation goals, what we need to be doing as a community is kind of how I was viewing this. So I think the whole thing, it might not change dramatically, but some parts might, as we have gotten a better understanding of different aspects of our water system. I don't know.
Okay.
Does it make sense to people that a lot of these things that are highlighted in blue on the table of contents are the things that are largely city staff project work, and then we might have input or discussion so we understand them? Or are some of these feeling like they need more interaction with the board?
I don't think necessarily need more interaction with the board, but just I thought it was WRE, water resources. This is going to, not water rights. First of all, Carly, just as a point, that's WRE, I believe it's going to water resources. And we're required to do this so that if we were to get any sort of grant from water rights, water resources, or the Division of Drinking Water, this document is required by that, for that. I guess my question is demand projections at build out. So there's a list of items that Water Resources is expecting to see at this point in time. And I was not sure that demand projections to build out was actually what was required. Build out's an interesting term. I would just at this point in time suggest that city look into the requirements and see whether they just want the next 10 years, next 20 years, next 50 years, or do they actually want build out before they chase that number down. It might be easier to look at what's going to be in 50 years from now. Okay.
Well, and I thought from our past discussions too, while this is, there's the things that are required by Department of Water Resources, there's also, we don't have to stop with just that necessarily.
This is true.
So that's part of why I think checking in on this list, does it feel like it encompasses all of the things that it should encompass that would be useful? And I think that is a good question about demand projections to build out, or is it demand projections to what? Like defining that is a good idea.
I find demand projections to build out kind of an intangible number at this point in time, although you could probably come up with a number. I'm wondering exactly what it would look like or how precise it might be. Whereas 10 years, 30 years, 50 years, those numbers 10, 30, and 50 would be increasingly, how would you say it, variable as you went out from 10 to 30 to 50. And it might be more helpful to actually have those numbers at 10 and 20 in terms of planning for the city.
So I guess that begs the question a little bit to me, Carly, of I know when this was written before, I'm not sure that there was a whole lot of different department staff involvement. So, pardon me?
There was not, no. He
So,
pretty much talked to some people privately and maybe at City Hall, but I don't remember any interdepartmental participation.
okay. So maybe what that's suggesting to me is that these sections in blue, I don't know if it's a staff thing, Carly, or if it's the board to kind of look at it and go, all right, which of these does planning need to make sure they look at? Which of these does engineering need to make sure they look at, so that we make sure what's in this plan is actually helpful to the different departments? Does that seem, I know that won't happen like this month or even maybe this quarter, but if we at least know that that's something that we might need staff to do at some point.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on, Cara. This this is like information that the city has, and we will probably be producing the data and the numbers and then presenting to you, the board, I think, are the results and our methodology for review. Does that make sense?
Yep.
I don't expect you folks to spend time churning and doing this sort of kind of engineering, this kind of work. I think as quality, you'd be very valuable as quality control to make sure we're understanding the parameters, that we're producing information that is helpful to you as decision makers. And we're presenting it in such a way that it not only is valuable to Department of Water Resources, but also to you as policymakers. So I think we'd be looking for that kind of feedback.
So it sounds like then it actually could, Mike, change quite a bit if when the planning department gets into looking at demand at build out, or at 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, or when Levi gets to look at the current distribution system, or all of these different things may change quite a bit if there's things in the document that different departments feel like we're missing. Possibly. Does that seem like that might happen?
Are you posing the question to Carly?
I was kind of trying to talk back to Mike's question from the beginning of suggestion that this probably won't change very much. It sounds to me like it actually could change quite a lot.
And that's what we last talked about, that it would probably change quite a bit in terms of how who's involved in the process, and then how we remove material that we feel is irrelevant to what we're trying to do.
Right.
Or add.
Okay.
I also there might be some additional, there's an updated list, not an updated list. There's a list on the Department of Water Resources page for these. And I think ours was a little more inclusive, this 2016 plan, which is good news, and we can keep it more inclusive, but we will want to double check to make sure we're not missing any required data points.
Right.
But I don't know that we've done that really close comparison at this point, but it does give you a good idea. Like, it doesn't require our water rights necessarily. I don't think that doesn't have to be produced, although I do think it is valuable in a plan like this and for policymakers.
Okay, so these sound like things that over the next year to 8 year maybe, we would be getting different pieces of this from staff when people have time to get into these different sections. And this list might change a little bit based on Department of Water Resources information. And then as we go through it, we also may want to suggest some things like Arnie just did about demand projections of how we might want to do those things. And that might involve a conversation with engineering or the planning department or whatever. So are people comfortable with this portion of the plan and how that revision process is going to work?
Sure enough.
So then we can move on to the next slide, which when Carly gets a second, sorry. So the stuff in orange down at the bottom here is the stuff that kind of is related to what it seems like is more the water board's topics of what we need to be discussing. I think having things in here like what Mike, you were talking about in regards to re-examining our purpose and our bylaws, and then what we need to revise in that is, I think, a piece of all of this. I do have a series of slides after this that kind of break this down a little bit, so it's a little less of a giant thing to talk about. But is there anything that you guys feel is missing, or any of these that are the most urgent or timely that you feel like should come first?
So Cara, is your bullet points there in orange, they don't, right to my eye, they don't correspond one-to-one, certainly to the topics in the table of contents, but they still address the same subject, water conservation goals and practices, perhaps. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, so Carly had sent me some stuff that I don't even remember where it all came from. Somehow some of it came from us, I believe. Some of it came from other discussions. And so, yeah, what we have in the existing table of contents may change as we work through what we think is important to put in there. Because I think some of this was not, there's some pretty lengthy lists in there, but what were we really doing? What are we really doing? Do these things even capture what we feel is important? I think is sort of what we need to start talking about as a group. And I don't want to use too much of the meeting because we have a couple other agenda items where we have staff presentations, correct?
Correct.
So maybe we go on to because what the next slide will give you a sense of what, so these were some of the different conservation measures. I'm expecting this will basically be a standing agenda item, I would think, for a while. And if we go on to the next slide, this is the first, so this is the list that comes from the BMPs from Department of Natural Resources, Water Resources, I believe. So some of the stuff we already have in place, but maybe we need to reevaluate it. You know, this whole concept of having a water conservation coordinator, committee, or team. Well, that's kind of us. So maybe one of the things we need to include in our revision process is revising our bylaws or examining that process. What does that look like? How do we do that? And then the next one is revise, you know, the water conservation plan. Well, we're in the revision process of that now. So these we kind of have, but we're going to maybe revise. And then the next slide shows some of the things that are a part of it. And so I put these in a slightly different order from what they came from Department of Natural Resources. I kind of put the physical system first because it felt like it was, you know, I've tried to go from what's tangible down to the things that are more intangible. But I think we need to, you know, these are the list. This is the list from DNR. Is this list enough? What's best for Moab? What do we need to talk about? Is this a water board thing, or is it public works, or is it engineering? Like, I think that's the other piece we need to look at on some of these is, are they ours or are they staff things? So, and then the next few slides are just these different topics. So if we want to talk about some of this now, or if we want to, I think it'd be pretty easy. It's a pretty small PowerPoint to send this out to everyone. We could go through this so everyone can then be thinking about it. And as I want to make sure we leave time for the different staff reports that are supposed to come to us today too. So what's the pleasure of the group?
I'd like you to email this to us.
Yeah. Oh, I was figuring it could go. Why don't we just for now go to the next slide, then we could just go through this, you know, just to show. So then there's the outreach services. Again, these came directly from the BMPs that were provided by DNR. This may or may not be a list that works for us. We might want to include more. Oh, no, that's not your hand, Eric. That's something on the, okay, sorry. I'm trying to pay attention to everybody and look at the PowerPoint at the same time. So there's a section on outreach programs or services. What are we already doing? Is it formal or informal? What's the process on that? And then the next slide shows suggested education and training. I think a big thing here is to identify who is the audience. Is this educational or inspirational or both, or what are we doing here? Then I think we're almost to the last slide. There's one or two more. We've got rebates, incentives, rewards. Rosemarie was working on some of that, maybe looking at what, you know, what's going on there. We're talking water pricing right now. I think I try to just pose some questions on each of these slides as far as like what will work best for us as opposed to other areas. Have we already done things? Can we measure these things at all? And then the next slide is almost the last slide. This one is, you know, I think definitely heavily involves engineering and planning. How does that process work? Where do we want to be in that? Where does planning or engineering want us in that? How do we assist with this in an efficient way? And then I do believe the next slide is the last one, which is what did we miss? And so that's kind of the thought process I thought would make sense for us all to start to go through. And I don't know You know, we can go through as much or as little of this right now as you want. How much time do we need for the different presentations, Carly? Because I don't want to shortchange others.
No, I think that they can be kind of flexible. I think I didn't give them, like, I was thinking like around 30 minutes each, but they can shut those, you know, they can trim it if needed. It depends on your level of discussion and interest. So if you want to take more time, feel free. We're only at 2:30.
Okay, because I'm having some minor, I'm figuring out how to like look at the agenda, look at the PowerPoint, and look at all of you at the same time. So bear with me. Because the other items on the agenda include overnight accommodations discussion, water rates, and then that's it. So we can take about half an hour to go back through some of this in detail now, if the board would like to do that, or we can plan on doing that at a subsequent meeting. I think we might have lost Denver. Was he still there? Anyway. So yeah, I don't know what your pleasure is at this point, where people's heads are at. Yeah.
Well, if we've got staff sitting around and ready to come online and do their thing, I hate to waste their time and have them sit around waiting for us. So let's just let them do their thing and let them go back to work.
So maybe we go ahead, let them do that so they aren't wondering when they get to do it. And then if we have time left at the end of the meeting, we could go back through some of this stuff. Does that work for folks?
Yeah.
Okay. So whoever's ready, Carly.
Sounds good. I think Corey is up, Summer.
Correct.
Show him in.
Okay, Corey, you should be, he's connecting. Corey, can you hear us?
Hey, Corey. Can you hear us yet?
Doesn't show that he's connected to audio.
Okay.
And I lost Chuck.
Oh.
Uh-oh.
We're losing men.
This is not good.
I can text Chuck too, but Corey, you can't hear us? Looks like he's trying to figure it out.
Looks like it.
Corey? It goes so smoothly. He said he has video, but no audio. This has happened before. I'm just going to tell him, make sure we're not muted. Your volume is up.
I don't show on my side that he's muted.
Well, is that?
There we go.
Is that the problem? There we go.
How's this work, guys?
All right.
Okay. I was watching on YouTube and then had a lot going on in the transition, but it came up in a weird format where it wasn't accepting my audio right away. I had to go into the settings. So I think we're all set.
And yeah, so just a little bit of background. Cara asked that we prepare, I think, some grander, like, or broader context for the overnight accommodation discussion. So you could get an idea of what's just basically like just a bigger picture idea. We sort of zoomed in on water conservation, and I think that was a little disorienting at the beginning because you couldn't see the bigger picture. So I think Corey's here to give that bigger picture this time around, and hopefully it provides kind of context when you're thinking about like what, like the demand consequences of these kinds of accommodations or developments. So. Take it away, Corey.
All right, guys, I'm going to move to my share screen and we'll work through the presentation I had pulled up, and then I did share quite a bit in the staff report for you guys. Hopefully you've had a chance to look over a lot of that information, and that'll expedite this conversation a little bit. Is everyone able to see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, so just to quickly review what we had discussed last time was essentially the current status of the draft ordinance 2019-30 that was last presented to City Council on January 9th. We went over, as Carly mentioned, the specific sections of what was that topic B, 1, 2, and 3, which were covering the maximum feasible rainwater catchments, sod, zero escape landscaping, and bioretention. So just a quick review, that was the same exact slide we had viewed last time. Moving forward at the recommendation, this was included in the staff report memo of the City Council agenda item for water. So this is actually taken right from that City Council presentation that Nora Shepherd gave. And I'll also comment, Nora was going to join us today, but was not feeling very well. So she had to bow out for this afternoon. But hopefully I'll be able to answer any of those questions that are regarding the City Council. I know Mike obviously was present, but myself, I've only just been able to look at the minutes. So the memo for water really just covers what we had discussed last time in a little bit less of an ordinance language fashion, as far as the rainwater catchment, maximum sod, the zero escape landscaping, and bioretention, bioinfiltration, with that one additional section discussing the gray water action that, pending the state action and then county, we can move forward with as the city. In addition to that, within that memo, there were the breakout sections to give you the larger concept of the ordinance, including energy, transportation, mixed use, civic space and open space, height, maximum building and project size, and metering. These were all topics that both the Planning Commission and the City Council are negotiating and navigating together to find what standards are going to work best, water being one of those topics. We'll just move right along into the RC zone as we were talking. So this is a context map of Moab City and where the RC, yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, forgive me, Corey, excuse me, if you've been participating or knowledgeable about planning commission meetings and so forth. As a city council member now, I'm just asking when we might expect to see this topic come up again at a city council meeting. You may remember Nora was late last year was pushing to get this done by the end of the year or shortly thereafter. It's now April, and it's been quite a few meetings now since anything has come back from Nora or the Planning Commission. So could you give me a real quick update on what to expect in the near future?
This, I don't believe, is a topic that we are covering this Thursday with our Planning Commission. Prior to the current situation where we had to cancel because of the COVID situation, the OA discussion was scheduled for Planning Commission at that meeting. So this will be our first meeting after the first cancellation because of COVID. So we're really just, we have two smaller items that we're working on just to kind of get the commission back into moving gear. And then my guess would be probably the following Planning Commission meeting, they would be able to conclude that conversation that they were supposed to be having, and then at that point being able to bring it back. So my best guess would be the beginning of May. But again, it's up to Nora, certainly.
Okay, well, thank you. That helps.
Yeah. Jumping back into the map here, as we were talking at the last water board meeting, getting a context of what we were actually looking at as far as the RC goes. This larger scope view, you can see, if you can see my cursor, starting at the bridge and running down to the driveway access for the Portal RV Resort and stopping right next to JJ Wong's open field. So if you might have seen some horses in there, it's right across from this property here, which is the Moab Springs Ranch.
And what
little
zone,
bit?
Sorry, what zone is the blue? Like the yeah, right there.
Right. This is the C4.
Okay. Thank you.
So just a little bit closer view of the parcel map within that zoning. And we'll just jump into the even closer view. This is not showing up on the screen very well, but hopefully it did come to you guys as far as that packet with a lot clearer text. But this is a breakdown of the individual parcels and the parcel owners. The blue shaded areas, these are the vacant and non-developed parcels that are left in the RC. Every other parcel has development on it or being built. In the case of the Moab My Place is under construction right now.
Is that the one that's got the heavy equipment moving dirt and all that right this minute? Okay.
That's right.
What that was. Thank you.
This Palladium Foundation is not within the city limits, but for context is a large section of the highway sides there. This section, the Johnson Neal Bruce, is a section parcel that is removed from the highway and actually has no road access to it. So it's kind of a unique parcel. It's a fairly sized parcel. Again, it's a very hilly and then partial cliff parcel. So the possibilities for development are not great on that particular parcel, but it is kind of a unique situation where it would, at the current ownership, would not be able to be developed. So we've kind of taken that one out of the equation.
Well,
This parcel,
most of that area there for by the tram is also completely undevelopable as far as overnight accommodations go. You could cut that down to just the first 200 feet from the highway, and that's about all it's going to be, cost effective to develop.
right. And what Eric's talking about, this was a subdivision that we processed in Planning Commission earlier, or last year in 2019, where the tramway is really here at the far corner. And this is that flat section of the driveway. Everything where that jagged parcel begins to take off is steep hillside and cliff. And then really everything to the north of that is undevelopable. This Grand County piece, or city piece of Grand County property, Grand County owns that, is cliff, non-developable as well. So really it's this section of this particular parcel with Salt Lake Accommodations LLC, and then these 4 parcels here that we're analyzing.
So one question with the Slick Rock Campground, and which is already overnight accommodations, if someone came in and wanted to change that from a campground to a hotel or something like that, would there be, this is kind of an ill-formed question, but it just kind of dawned on me, there's a lot of spaces in there. It would have to still follow the overnight accommodations, the new ordinance. It wouldn't be able to say, oh, well, we had X number of overnight accommodations in our campground, and so we want to stay with that number. That wouldn't necessarily be able to happen, right?
To a certain degree, they are vested with their current number of overnight accommodations. However, if they're building a new resort under a new development in any new development, and they're redeveloping right now, has to meet all the current standards.
So it's basically the same as it, like a house in town that's in the C3 where you can't well, I'll withdraw the question, but I think I get what you're saying. Thank you.
Yeah, right. And that would essentially go for the Western Rivers Expedition parcel here, or even the Atomic or Holiday Inn there.
Okay.
So if we don't have any specific questions here, we can go ahead and move on. I was trying to move this process along a little bit quicker. I know you guys are tight on time, so feel free to jump in if I'm moving too quick or not answering the questions you're looking for.
Well, yeah. So Corey, if I may, in council meetings, we started with RC because, it's kind of out there, well, in large part because it had what was claimed to be relatively few developable parcels that have not yet been developed, and it was a little smaller of a bite off, if you will. And so when I look at your blue parcels out here, the ones that are undeveloped, and in addition to those, the ones in brown that are also in the RC zone but have already also, they could be candidates for redeveloping. It looks to my eye on your map there's still a fair amount of stuff out there that would be impacted by whatever standards and processes we adopt for the RC zone. I mean, it's not like it's all locked up tight, which was kind of the impression I kind of got. I mean, it was promulgated by some council members. It looked like to me there's still a lot that could be done with that. Would you agree with that statement?
I think given the new development of the World Mark, the Element, the Moab My Place, and the Slick Rock new redevelopment, the owners that have just come in and they're putting a significant effort into redeveloping that parcel. The Moab Valley RV is probably a possible candidate for redevelopment or to sell for a hotel purpose. But outside of that, I mean, it's as anything as far as zoning, every parcel in theory could be redeveloped, but the situation in the RC that we've perceived is really kind of the one we're presenting here of the possibility of redevelopment or an initial development of that vacant land. So my assessment would be there's not a tremendous amount of new construction that can occur in the RC.
So
relatively.
The Slick Rock Campground and Moab Valley RV Park both have plans to improve their current camping facilities and are going to be putting in water lines and so on to perhaps increase the number of spaces to in some minor way or just change what they use them for. But as far as we know, they're both investing in minor improvements at this point that kind of indicate they're not interested in spending a lot of money or selling the property for motel development in the short term.
Okay, so Eric, if I may ask, I know Chuck has been telling us about the north trunk line and getting, what am I trying to say? Getting clearance, what's that word? Condemnation of a couple of properties. So how's the north trunk line going? Is that in process or what?
It's basically done. We're just finishing up the lift station testing at the Archway Inn. It should be operable pretty soon. And that's what Moab Valley RV is designing. The main part of what their current design is to extend the north trunk line into the park and pick up all the stuff that they've now been putting in a septic tank. So that's going to be a big, as far as water quality goes, that septic waste will no longer be going into the water table in the wetland.
Oh, really? I hadn't heard that one, extending it all the way to Archie, but maybe I haven't been paying enough attention. That's interesting.
Yeah, and we also hope to get an easement through Slick Rock Campground to pick up the Atomic Grill, which also is on septic at this point.
Okay, thank you. Huh.
Back to you, Corey.
All right, thank you guys. Moving on to the next slides. These were screenshots from Google Earth taken of the general landscape that you might be seeing along that eastern side of 191. So this is generally where the My Place Hotel is going to be and the type of landscape they're trying to work with as far as hills and cliffside development. And then this being that section of properties right in a row to the west side of the highway there, just off of the frontage road. So you can see Archway Inn in the far distance there. So this is that landscape that has that potential for development that we recognize. Oh, sure. Go ahead.
Hey, Corey. So I went out for a bike ride there today. The bike path on the east side of the highway north of 5th West, it's still intact, just like your photograph shows it, but I saw some blue stakes lines and so forth running for quite a long length down there. That's maybe for electrical stuff. But is that bike path that's currently laid out there going to remain, or are they going to rebuild that as part of the highway widening?
That's going to remain, Mike. That's pretty much, one improvement that was put in 2014. and the new design doesn't really touch that or impact it in any way. What you're seeing there are just blue stake marks because of the current widening project.
Okay, good. Thank you.
In addition to that, with the My Place hotel going in, they will be redeveloping their entrance, which would cut across that bike path. So they will maintain the bike path, but I believe they are going to slightly adjust the line of the path to give a little bit more clearance for vehicles pulling in, egress and degress from the property there. So
yeah. So I was, is that road that they're cutting in on the east side right now? They're out there grading it right now.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
As far as build out, it is fairly difficult to come up with concepts that represent really what our development standards are holistically going to create. To a certain degree, we don't want to be so onerous that we'll be continually repeating the same development coming in because they're locked into a certain design standard within those development standards. But what I've tried to show here is maybe a general context of massing and scale, not necessarily the detail elements, but within that 4,000 square feet development limit, and then the additional 2,000 square feet depending on if they would include certain features within the standard. So if they were to go to a higher standard, they would get that bonus of an additional third story or square footage.
So what you're saying, to make sure I'm understanding, is that there's a cap on the square footage of the building? That's correct. And is it based on the size of the lot, or how does that work?
It's a general, it's a general standard of mass and scale of 4,000 square feet. However, there are certain additional rules that would limit the property's ability to subdivide, so that instead of a larger lot with a smaller hotel, now they're just having more hotels on those subdivided lots. Within the RC, the language that specifically recognized that is included in the memo that was a part of your staff reports.
Okay.
But essentially, it would protect those properties from becoming many parcels.
Okay.
This second one, again, not a great example, but showing that third story. So say if they were to incorporate a certain percentage of commercial space and or open and civic space, they could gain additional square footage for overnight accommodation use, in addition to the 20,000 that would be for general use. So really, and this is just a little bit of a slide to land on. So that was really just a very quick overview. I submitted quite a bit of information along with the staff report, the agenda summary, that has detailed information on those things, but overview, that's essentially what we're looking at and hoping to share that information.
Yeah, I might add, Corey, thank you all. As far as you guys on the water board are concerned, I guess I would add that most of the contentious discussion about what OA standards should look like really haven't focused so much on water. We're all pretty much on board with that. The more contentious issues are, as Corey just pointed out, maximum parcel sizes and maximum building sizes. Energy is a big one, renewable energy on site and so forth. Mixed use and that kind of stuff. Those are things that we're still going round and round about. But the water seems to be pretty widely accepted. But still, I'm delighted that Corey has come and offered to explain what the water part of it is about, and so we have a better understanding of it. So I appreciate that.
Is there anything people feel might be being missed that we should be passing on to Corey?
I was not at the last staff meeting. Is this the last slide, Corey?
It is, yes, Arnie.
You're showing a bioretention pond there, basically a sedimentation pond that actually looks like something's growing there and it looks good. If you travel to Phoenix, they're all over the place and they prevent flooding. So I'm glad to see those are in there. I think that that standard ought to be in all new subdivisions. But if you want to stop sharing your screen for a minute, I wanted to talk for a moment just so everybody in the water board understands the possibilities we can have with rainwater retention. So you guys realize I am a big fan of rainwater retention. My family has a modest log home, and instead of drilling a well, we actually put in a rainwater harvesting system, and we managed to supply our modest log home with culinary water. I've got a little drinking water, sir. I've got a cistern. I've got a little drinking water system set up in the cabinet. And we've been fortunate, although we're in an area with only 8, 9, 10 inches of water, even though it's at 9,000 feet, to be able to collect enough water. We've never had to go truck water since we put that system in. We've been lucky that way. It does collect water rather well. However, we don't water anything outside, and we do a fairly good job of minimizing the water use inside. I'd like to show you guys one thing about this and talk just a little bit about rainwater harvesting, if you don't mind. Let me find it right here. Is it going? Oh, I got to double click it. So one of the difficulties with rainwater harvesting is that we get a fair amount of rain in the latter part of the year and in the early part of the year. And then in the middle of summer, if you notice, June is actually our lowest month of water that we actually get. And October is when we have the greatest annual average precipitation. I realize that average doesn't really apply anymore, and anything can happen these days with our climate scenarios. But historically, we've collected a fair amount of water. We get a fair amount of rain in October. The problem with that in terms of rainwater harvesting is that we don't really need to use that much of it in October. And the rainwater harvesting system I have and others that are out there have real problems in the wintertime. The rainwater harvesting we have as an example at the USU, they have to drain their system come the middle of November because it'll freeze up. And it's basically lets the water flow back kind of where it used to flow before. Doesn't really capture it at all because the system will freeze up, causing damage to the system and so on and so forth, till at least mid-February. Where I'm at, it's actually, we're looking at April before we can plug the system back in, and we're fortunate enough to get enough water to supply our home system. But what I do want you to realize is that the amount of water that you're actually going to end up collecting in those rainwater catchment is probably not enough to get the water conservation that you're really looking at, unless you do put it underground and do a couple other things with it, which also make it a lot more expensive and a lot more, problematic for the developer. I just wanted to let you know that at this point in time and make everybody aware that the actual amount of water we're going to get isn't that great from this systems, from the standpoint of outdoor watering. And,
Corey did mention that in slightly different terms at the last meeting, definitely.
How do I get my screen back? Oh, I say stop sharing. I figured that out. I do believe that rainwater systems are great. Rainwater catchment systems are great. I also really like your bioinfiltration, and my drugs have just showed up at the door, and I need to answer this right now. I'm going to mute my button and step away from the screen. I guess I'll be back in a moment.
Okay.
So the tank, the issue he was talking about with freezing, it's not too expensive to get a buriable tank.
Right.
Cover it with dirt, so that it's 2 or 3 feet of dirt on top, and it pretty much freeze protected. But the problem that creates is if you end up with a mound behind your house or somewhere near it, because you want the gravity flow.
Right.
But anyway, just FYI.
Other questions or suggestions? Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, well, I mentioned this last time. I remember, I think it was, USU lady. Oh my, I'm reading that wrong. Yeah, Ross, thank you. She did a little report about rainwater harvesting, and what struck my eye was that in our dry climate, we don't get a lot of rain. And so the amount of rainwater that you could conceivably collect, ignoring the problems that Arnie just pointed out, which I hadn't thought about, I'm glad he brought that up, is it's not much compared to what you may need depending on what your landscaping is, and it may not be much compared to gray water if we decide to go that route, particularly if they allow a wider variety of gray water sources and so forth. So I'm just thinking ahead to lawsuits and putting them into overnight accommodation standards. I mean, I appreciate the environmental beauty of what we're trying to do, but I can see too that a property owner may say, well, you know, what is this really buying us? It's going to cost me a bunch of money to put this in. Why are we doing this? Kind of thing. So any further discussion on that subject?
I've got something that's kind of related, but slightly different, because when you mentioned gray water, I've been finding with a few people in town who do have a gray water system. I don't know if they're all legal or not, if they've all been permitted through Orion or not, but they've talked about, they've ended up having problems with plants dying because they're actually getting too much water.
Really?
So it has to be managed. And I think that's kind of a critical piece to this that is important, because it's a long story that doesn't need to be gone into at the moment, but it's just something that it hadn't dawned on me before, that in some soils and certain plants, too much water is as bad as too little water. So if you're trying to use and reduce irrigation, how you design that system is pretty important, and how you design the landscape. So I think that some of those elements, of course, are up to whoever the designer is of the project, but it would be good to make sure there's something in the code that helps them understand that, you know, you can't just dump it out there and expect everything to be hunky-dory. It actually has to be really well thought out and engineered, which I think.
Solar survival architecture down in Taos, all of their earthships have what's called a gray water planter in it. So the gray water leaves the washer or whatever you're using it in or getting it from, and it goes through a grease and particle filter where you catch, solids or stuff like that. And then it goes into this gray water planter, which is like a big bag with rocks on the bottom to conduct the water through the lower part. Then it's got sand, and then it has soil on top. And then you set the elevation that the water leaves the planter, so as to make sure that the type of plants you want to grow are going to get the necessary water, like Cara's talking about, or too much. So you design it that way. But that will then water the plants automatically. And you can make it as long as your house or as long as your living room, and then 3 or 4 feet wide. You can actually grow quite a bit of food in there if you're inclined to do so. So, these things are a matter of design in a lot of ways, and not simply a matter of how much water you have.
Right. Okay. Arnie, you're muted at the moment. You have to unmute yourself.
Sorry. Corey, could you take us back to, I think it was the third slide you had, which was the presentation on what water conservation measures are included in this ordinance?
I can. Hold on one moment.
There you go. Drought resistant, waterized, zero escaping landscaping. I think all that's great. I like the turf grass idea, that you do at least allow them some if they would like to have some. And maybe that works for a spot for people to take their pets too. I am wondering why on here there's no discussion of what they call, come on, Arnie, the EPA calls water sense, faucets, and other type of, come on, Arnie, where's your head at? Fixtures in the house, in the hotels.
Right. As a part of our last meeting, I'm sorry we didn't have you there for that, Arnie. That was a part of the discussion. And I'm wondering if I could even maybe pull up that slide from that previous presentation might help if this isn't sufficient enough.
I guess the thought process here is that we're going to make it so expensive for water that they're going to want to put them in anyways, and so there's no reason to put it in a code. But I'm not sure that that's what's happening, and I'm asking that question.
Excuse me, Arnie. I asked the same question some time ago, and I think the answer I got, and Corey, correct me if I'm wrong, is that it was already standard building code, standard something or other, and it really was redundant to put it in this code. Everybody's already doing it, basically.
Well,
That's correct, Mike.
And it's already in code. Great.
Okay. More questions or suggestions or comments for Corey from everybody? So moving forward with this, Corey, from what I think I heard you say, it won't be at this week's Planning Commission meeting, but it will be at the next Planning Commission meeting.
We haven't, set the agenda yet, but that was the very last item we were supposed to cover.
So the soonest it would be is in 3 weeks or so.
Right, 2 weeks. Yeah, 2 and some.
Is there a desire from anyone on this body to go to that meeting or provide any feedback or thoughts? Or do you feel like this is, do you want Corey to come back and tell us where it ends up, or what's your pleasure?
Unmute me. You know what? As the Water Conservation Board, I do think we ought to at least be giving some sort of opinion on what they're throwing out there. And I know we're not going to vote on anything today, but if the board at this point in time or in time in the future believes that the ordinances that as proposed are sufficient to attain the water conservation we're looking for, and probably to the maximum extent possible, I believe it'd be appropriate for us to write at least something to the planning board stating such.
So
this guidance, if you'd like, please.
This kind of, to me, talks to the whole process issue that we need to sift out in relation to the plan and other things. So Carly, maybe you can answer this. In this sort of situation, what's the most useful thing for staff, for the different departments, so that we're not bogging down the system, but we're also making sure we're providing input and or support or criticism when needed? What's the best way to do that?
I think Arnie was really onto something with the written comments. I think that would be very useful to them, that they consider so early on. Right now, your authority is you advise the council, just like the planning commission, and not crosswise, but that doesn't mean you don't have valuable input. So I do think that they would be curious to hear what you have to say. I'm worried a little bit about a joint meeting with all of you and just the functionality of that. And it's my impression that written comments would be really great for them, because that's something for them to react to prior to the meeting, so then they can discuss it rather than all of you getting into a meeting, all 14 of you, and kind of going back and forth. And does that make sense? I think just from a functionality point of view, the written comments could be enormously helpful. And then we can also provide those written comments to the council, depending, or unless, either by putting it to the planning commission first, what happens is the planning commission might integrate them into their plans already. And so the work will be done, right? Or, in a perfect world, or a suggestion might be carried forward by them, because it will be part of their recommendation and cooked into it. I think it's also appropriate, depending on how they kind of shake things out, if you want to provide additional comments straight to the council, once the planning commission is given a recommendation, you can do that. Corey, is that good with our process, do you think?
I think that'd be very helpful. And it would just add to the ordinance moving forward, like you're saying.
Yeah, and that way you just sort of, because the planning commission is like the land use authority, and it's good to hook it on to theirs. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I think I really think that's a fantastic process, and we can finally get your the water board integrated.
Right. So speaking to that, then I know we're coming into this discussion about overnight rentals in the RC a little bit on the late side. At this meeting, like what's the process then for if a letter like that is able to be drafted? Is that something that one of the board members needs to do? Do we then have to vote on it as a board? Like what, I'm wondering if we might miss the boat on this particular thing if the timeline is in 2 weeks that the planning commission is meeting to talk about this.
I don't know that you need to necessarily vote on it. I can, if that is needed. So I think it is appropriate for the water board for you to develop your recommendations.
Okay.
Whether there is a vote required to like give a seal approval and have you, Cara, sign it, I'll have Lori take a look. And if so, we can just do a quick Zoom meeting. It takes 5 minutes. You vote on that only thing, you know, and then we can do a special meeting. But oftentimes it's not unusual, for example, for the mayor to write a letter on behalf of the city without the city council necessarily voting on it. So, but let me double check that. If so, I think that's something we can just, that'll be a real quick little thing to spit out real quick. So,
okay. So then I need to, or go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. So Corey, if we wanted to get it to the planning commission in time, what is that next Wednesday when we would need to submit it? I can't remember your submittal deadlines.
Right. I would think so. I usually, with Nora, we submit earlier than we need to, just for to make things certain. But I think Wednesday would be sufficient to get it out.
And if it's a little later, I think it's also appropriate, Cara, for you just to send it to the planning commissioners on behalf of the water board too, which is, so it doesn't necessarily have to be in the packet. I think in the packet is great because it's public facing.
Right.
But if all else fails, you can send it to them and then we can post it in like the minutes. So it is public facing. So there are a couple of ways to do it.
Okay. So then the next question I have to the board is, I'm in an odd situation of actually much busier than I normally would be, which surprises me because the nursery's crazy. And then I'm also still involved in the fire fuels work, even though the larger event got canceled. So my capacity to draft a letter in the next 7 days is pretty small. So if it's the board that has to come up with this, is there anyone who'd be willing to work with me on that so that I can maybe help review it, take a look at it, edit it, whatever, but because I don't have a lot of focus time at the moment. So yeah, go ahead, Mike.
So I'm wondering, Cara, if we could simplify this by just saying Corey's already presented to us the draft language, all right, that's in the OA standards now as the Planning Commission is considering it. And could we just simply, I don't know how public notification on all this works, but for example, ideally, could we right here and now, for example, at this meeting, someone make a motion for the water board to endorse the language as it stands and reference a particular document so there's no confusion about exactly what language we're talking about.
I think unfortunately, Mike, we only had this as a discussion item, not an action item. So can we do that, Carly?
We have potential recommendations.
Oh.
And let me ask my recorder, Summer.
Yes, sorry, it's been a little busy up here.
No, it's okay. So we're wondering, I'm putting you on the spot and seeing if we are allowed to, the water board would like to just provide a recommendation to the planning commission. It's a simple endorsement of the current code, the recommendations. Mike, was that correct? Was that your motion or your proposed motion?
I mean, the agenda is listed with a potential recommendation, so it appears that they could make that recommendation.
I think it's okay. Yeah, I wanted to leave room for you guys to be able to make some formal
recommendations. So Arnie, does that meet your needs on this particular topic? I think in future we can maybe actually draft a letter or do something that's a little more involved, but it feels like on this timeline, does that meet what you need, or are you feeling like you need more in there?
I think Mike's suggestion was just fabulous, and let's go with it.
Okay, so Mike, is that a motion?
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out exactly how to word it because I don't have Corey's. When I make the motion, I'd like to get it on the record as exactly what document I'm talking about. Corey, could you share that? Could you somehow provide that information so I can actually phrase it, the language I want to use?
Yes. Yeah. Let me pull up the draft ordinance here. Okay. Alrighty. So if you can see that, Mike, that is the draft ordinance that was presented on that date, and the language that we're reviewing now is later down in the document.
Okay, so then would it work for me to make a motion along the lines of referencing draft 0108-2020, see it, so the paragraphs referring to water conservation measures that the City Water Advisory Board endorses this language? Is that all I need to say, or what do you think?
I think that's an appropriate motion.
Okay.
So if that's
What?
the motion, do we have a second?
Oh, well, yeah, would you like me to state it a little more formally? See if I can. I don't know.
Sure.
Okay. I move then that the Water Advisory Board offer a recommendation, their recommendation of Planning Commission's draft 01.08-2020, City of Moab Ordinance 2019-030, and ordinance amending City of Moab Municipal Code, Section 1731 RC Resort Commercial Zone to allow new hotels and motels subject to the revised development standards, and in particular the paragraphs in that ordinance referencing water conservation measures.
So we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Where are you, Jeremy?
I'll second.
So was that, wait, so was that a second, Jeremy?
That was, yeah.
Sorry. All right, so we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Does this need a roll call vote, or is this a simple aye?
It will need a roll call vote.
Okay, so go ahead, Summer.
Okay. Jeremy.
Aye.
Cara.
Aye.
Denver. You're muted. Hang on.
There you go.
Denver.
Aye.
Okay. Arnie.
Aye.
Mike.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Corey, for your time. Is there anything else we need to talk about on this topic, or should we move on to Chuck's presentation and water pricing?
Thank you, Corey.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Oh, look, there's Chuck. I haven't seen Chuck in weeks.
Is there
Hi, Chuck.
Hello, Chuck. Chuck's presentation and water pricing.
Thank you, Corey.
Thank you.
I don't know what that is. Oh,
Somebody's got sound.
that was interesting. So we just have Chuck here to follow up and provide a little more information on just on our water rates discussion from last meeting. He's also going to be providing some more in-depth, I believe, information about our capital needs, and potentially, I don't want to, hopefully he has prepared this. I think he has some comparisons regionally, or at least in the state, about how our water rates stack up compared to other communities. So take a look at that.
Okay. Thanks, Carly and Kara. Can you hear me okay? Okay. First, I want to apologize. I couldn't get you this PowerPoint ahead of time. We just got some of this information from our consultant within the last day or so, and we've been refining some of it so we could make the presentation. So what I'd like to do is share screen with you and work through this.
Chuck, could you increase the volume on your computer a little bit? I'm having a little trouble hearing you.
Okay, I'll try.
Yeah, you're a little muffled, Chuck. I don't know.
Seriously? Where the hell are you? I lost everybody. Seriously?
Chuck, you're muted right now.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Is that any better?
A little better.
Okay. Let's try this and see if it works. What the end game on this presentation is going to be talking about water rate adjustments. But based on our last meeting, I put a little bit on the front end for an understanding not just of our capital needs, but a little bit of our system as it exists and has existed. So quickly, here's a pipe that, as you can see, was splitting as it was uncovered on the ground. Here's another one that was a leak that, as we uncovered dirt within about 4 feet of the pipe, it just started blowing because the pipe was weakened.
Hang on, Chuck.
Hey, Chuck, I don't know that, are you sharing your screen? I'm still seeing all of us. It's still the Brady Bunch.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
I was sharing the screen. I'll start it again. How about now? Can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll talk a little bit about water system condition. Here's a pipe that was exposed, and you can see it just an old cast iron pipe that was blown out, created a crack from corrosion and rust. Another example of a pipe that was not hit or hurt, but was actually, as we released the earth pressure nearby, the pipe just failed. Typically, this is this cast iron pipe, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a moment. But just a quick look at that, we do have failures and our system is aging. This is kind of a general service life of the pipe. The takeaway here is in this sentence here. Network designers often use 50 years as the average life expectancy for most pipe types. And of course, pipe can be everything from PVC, which is plastic, to clay, to cast and ductile iron, or concrete, or HDPE. And more specifically, I'll take a moment on this. The Utah State University did a study in 2018 where they reported that break rates have increased 27% in the past 6 years. And you wonder why that would happen. And it's because of the types of material that are typically were used in the past are starting to get caught up in this end of life cycle failure mode. And down here, you can see that cast iron pipe has 20 times more breaks in highly corrosive soils than in low corrosive soils. And we have highly corrosive soils, generally speaking, in the valley here. We've seen it over and over as we uncover pipes, both corrugated metal as well as the water system. And corrosion, rust, if you will, or impacts from the corrosive soils is a major cause of water main breaks. And utilities with a
excuse me, Chuck, what particular mineral content in the soils makes our soils highly corrosive?
It's salts, Mike, different types of salts.
Okay.
Utilities with a higher percentage of iron pipe may experience a higher percentage of corrosion-related breaks. And with that kind of study telling us that, here's a graph of what our system is composed of. And you can see that our system is 62% cast iron and about 36% PVC. That's the good news. This is kind of the bad news here, because that previous slide says that cast iron has more breaks than any other material. And that's part of the problem with our system, is that type of material was used, but throughout North America it was used, but it's ending the near end of its life cycle. This slide here, I just want to make sure you got that, is a slide where we've tracked the age of the pipe. And this is for culinary water distribution pipe greater than 4 inches, because most of our system is greater than 4 inches. And this is just old service lines, like 4 inches and less. But the interesting thing about it is for an age of 0 to 40, 23% of our system is less than 40 years old. And that's the good news. But from 50 to 60 plus, it's about 58%, or I'll call it 60%. Almost 2/3 of our system older than 50 years old. And there's some portion of our system that we just don't know the age on it. That's 14%. So in this table here just shows us that with the previous information, why we need to make improvements to our system, because it's failing, not because of mismanagement, but just because of the age of the system. And because of the
Hey Chuck, I just wanted to say something in regard to Mike's point. The salt comes from the salt dome, which is the same thing that's over in Arches National Park. But the whole Moab Valley is the bottom of it. Underneath the alluvium is the salt layer. And that salt is what is dissolving in the water in the USGS report when they talk about the brine layer. The brine layer is created by that salt dome. And so that is mixed in with all the other alluvium that we have in the valley and that our pipes are laid in.
Okay, thank you. I had a geologist for a wife, and she told me about this kind of thing. I thought maybe there might be other minerals in addition to the salts, but it sounds like that's a big one. Thank you, guys.
You're exactly right, Eric. So this table establishes the age of our pipes. This table, I'll just take a moment to explain it a little bit. So we said, well, what is the water replacement projects which we have been doing? So this goes back to 2006. You can see in 2006, we replaced 8,300 feet of 12-inch pipe. 2014, we did 2,500 feet of 16-inch pipe. So for the 13-year total between 2006 and 2014, we replaced 12,450 feet of pipe for a yearly average of 958 feet. Well, that's 22% of a 60-year yearly schedule from the USU report. If we'd have been keeping up with the report, maintenance levels that is recommended in that Utah State University report, we would have replaced 4,393 feet per year, not 958 feet per year. Again, it's documentation of why our system is in the shape it's in now.
So Chuck, does any city actually keep up with those guidelines, or are we really the outlier here?
I think when you look at near the end of this presentation, we're going to look at rates, Mike.
Yeah.
I think we'll see that our rates are so low that we haven't put money into maintaining our system compared to other cities that have higher rates that they are maintaining their system.
Yeah. All this is great, Chuck. I mean, I think you may have picked up on my sales point. You know, if you want to sell this to council, tell them why, and this does it. All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for the comment. I am trying to address your previous comment. So culinary water system, existing facilities and financials, just to kind of put another context in, not just about pipes. Everyone probably knows that our sources, where we get our water from, we have 4 springs and we operate 3 wells. 2 of those wells are culinary and 1 of them is irrigation. Essentially well 7 is used to provide irrigation for the golf course. We sell them water. Our storage system, we have 3 1 million gallon storage tanks. Distribution pipe greater than 4 inches, we've got about 48 miles of pipe. Our source protection areas cover about 28 square miles. That's both spring and well protection areas. Total water use, somewhere in the range of 1,800 to 2,400 acre feet per year. Connections, 1,746 residential and 562 commercial. For a total of 2,308 connections, and that's 2019 numbers. Those numbers change, you know, as the city grows. We do service a small portion of unincorporated counties, so those numbers include city residents and non-city residents. Issues that we are aware of because of the planning efforts that we've undertaken include inadequate fire suppression in places, low circulation, low pressures in system extremities. Our budget source is a water enterprise fund, so it's state statute allows us to operate as a business as opposed to just a general fund function. Our fiscal year 20 budget, the year we're in right now, was $1.26 million. And we're going to end up this year operating in a $54,000 deficit on the operations side because our rates aren't high enough to pay for that $1.26 million budget this year. Future facilities and financials, we need to increase our source capacity by an additional 1,500 gallons per minute, and that would be achieved through wells, not through springs. Just too hard to predict the springs. Storage, we need a new 2.2 million gallon storage tank. That will primarily, but will also provide some redundancy in our system. There are fire flow project costs beyond that storage tank, about $2.9 million. So in the upcoming budget year, starting July 1 of 2020 and going into June 30 of 2021, there will be, and this was what has been administration has recommended to council, or will when the time comes, a $98,000 deficit, assuming no rate increases or bonding in this coming fiscal year, because our expenses are just outpacing our revenue stream at these rates that we have. And also a recommendation that we've not done, the state recommends, is that we should put aside 5% of every annual water budget for repairs and for the unknowns when things happen. I mean, not to paint too dark of a picture, but if we were to have an earthquake here of any magnitude, our water system and the condition it's in those pipes that I showed you pictures of, I guarantee will be negatively impacted. There will be a lot of things that are negatively impacted, but we'd have to try and find some money to try and repair that. So that's one example of why we'd have that 5%. Future culinary water projects. So this information I'm giving you is from both the water master plan that was done in 2018 and we're updating now, as well as water impact fee analysis and a water rate analysis that Zions Bank is doing, has been currently doing as part of the master plan project. And we've identified capital improvements of $15 million and major maintenance needs of $163,000, excuse me. So those are kind of bottom line numbers. And here's a list of those projects. You'll notice down here that the $15,047,200 is going up to the top. You know, a new well, $2.2 million. Another new well. Earlier I said we needed 2 new wells. Construct a storage tank. It's a $3.4 million project. And then here's various. We just completed the design for this system here, the 2,600 feet of 10-inch and 2,700 feet of 12-inch along Mill Creek Drive. But we don't have money for construction. We were able to budget money for design this fiscal year, and we got that done. And then this is a list of the other projects.
So Chuck,
Yes.
where these all say install, is any of that replacement or is this all brand new?
A lot of it's replacement.
Okay, so install might be replaced on some of these cases.
Exactly.
Okay. Thank you.
Exactly. Yeah. Some of it is additional in order to provide better pressures, better fire flows by looping systems, but a lot of it is indeed to replace failing systems that's either undersized or just outlived its life, useful life.
That might not be a bad thing when bringing this to council and stuff to include which is replacement, because when I first looked at this, I was a little confused. Like, wow, that's a whole lot. But if over half of this is replacement, that puts a different level of urgency to it, in my opinion, probably.
I got it. I noted your comment. Good comment. Thank you. So those were the capital projects. So there's identifying the system needs, if you will. This I will take a minute. I know this is a lot to look at in a hurry, but what Zions has done is they have taken these, I think there's 16 cities, and they have more, but some of them were redundant. So I filtered some of them out, not based on money, but just based on the understanding. And you can see here's the rate structure. So our water rates right now are, there's a base rate, and then there's a tiers. And we talked about this last time. And as an example, right now, up to 3,000 gallons is included in the base rate. But after that, for every 1,000 gallons between 3 and 10, I should look, is 75 cents for that 1,000 gallons. So that's what the tiers are about. So we can look at, it varies from $12.85 for a base rate down to Park City, where they're paying $50.55 per month for a base rate. And if you include everything here except Moab, that averages out to be $23.30 per month for a base rate. Well, you know, that's one way to look at it. We also, so then we said, let's take out the high and the low. So we took Park City out to see maybe that was unduly influencing it. And then we took out Layton at the $12.85, and then did the average, excluding the high and the low. And it comes to $22.18.
Which is almost the same as the median as well. So
it is. It didn't have a lot. And the reason for that is so many of these, just visually looking at them, are near the $20 range, right? Just kind of looking at those in the middle.
Yes.
And here's what
Excuse
the
me,
various,
Chuck.
yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Park City, why are they so far out of bed with everybody else?
I don't know that much about Park City's system, except that what I have been told is they're a mountain town, right? They're up at 8,000 feet, I believe. They don't have, I can only speculate that their wells would be very deep wells.
They have to recirculate their water because of mining legacies.
wow.
So water quality.
So Park City also has the highest rate for wastewater treatment plant also in the state at the Snyderville Basin. They do get their water from a mine at it. It is very expensive for them to treat it right to begin with. And they have an arsenic problem and a couple other things. And all of those things in terms of water quality are probably what's leading to that higher rate.
Wow. Thank you.
Yeah, so this table I think is valuable just to see where Moab is comparable, not to every city in the state, but 16. And you know, some of them I thought, like Cedar City, I think Cedar City in some ways is similar to Moab in terms of size and that, so it's not the same. And then we put in Price, even though it's certainly a larger city, but it's geographically close compared to some of these other ones. So you can see that our rates, and we looked, and I believe that we asked finance to look the last time Moab had increased the base rate, and it was over 10 years. I think we've been stagnant for over 10 years in terms of base rate, which is one of the reasons we've not had revenues to do some of the maintenance that's needed or replacement, in my opinion.
Right. So just a couple really quick thoughts, Chuck, on that table. And because I think what I kind of see is there's talking to council, and then there's also helping the town population understand why it's inevitable that our rates for water are going up. And I think while Price and Cedar might not be in some people's minds completely comparable, I think, you know, a lot of these places that are on the Wasatch Front, I think people really wouldn't see as comparable to Moab. So those might be some really good numbers to help people understand, because, you know, there's going to be pushback about the need to raise rates. And so just thinking from an outreach and education perspective and getting people on board might help people understand they're still going to complain, but that, you know, we really are well out of what's necessary to have a functional system. So that's just a suggestion.
Are you suggesting that we have more towns that aren't up in the front?
I don't know about that, because without seeing the numbers, you know, I could see other places with culinary water, like well, none of the names are, all the places are coming into my mind, but the names are, it doesn't matter. I don't know about that because I think we are kind of comparable to a larger city simply because our transient population historically has been so much larger. But I think I think it's very, like Price and Cedar, I think are some nice examples of like, look, we're way below both of those. And I think, and those are places that people know, you know, they've been to Price, they've probably been to Cedar City, so they can kind of have a sense of like, oh, wow, okay, we really are out of whack a little bit here. Because I think that's going to be an important thing to do. Denver, go ahead and unmute yourself, Denver. The little mute thing on the, there you go.
Yeah. Chuck, that's really some good info there. Do most residents, like people like me, do we pay at level 1 in Moab? Is that almost everybody that just has a house? Are we level 1, or are there people that are way up in the 2, 3s, and 4s?
If you'll let me.
Yep.
I have that table, I think, relatively.
I have a comment before you leave that table, Chuck. At times, the literature I've kind of delved into a little bit talked also about our gross median income, and base rates being the base rate for just a connection, and then level 1 is enough to get water to my house and I can drink it. And I would wonder if you would like to perhaps have Zines look at also comparatively the median income in some of these other communities. And you could do it by county, and that's available to you. Obviously, your residential people are with the 2,000, how many connections were there? 1,936 or something. Probably take the bulk of your water, but I would suggest looking perhaps at the gross medium income for the cities that you're comparing to, for the base rate for residential for customers.
Yeah, the analysis that they did is based on a revenue. I'll write that down, Arnie. Median income. But this was based upon establishing our need and then determining rate. Can you see this table now, or do I need? You still seeing this new
Yes.
table? Okay. Denver, back to your question. I think this answers it. Water usage, this table 2 in 2019, and then they projected a usage in 2030, but this is actually based on what our use was last calendar year. So the first 2,000 gallons, there were 33 million in the city. Tier 2 was 70, which is 2,000 to 10,000 gallons, was 74 million gallons. And this was a surprise to me when I looked at it, and I don't know the answer to it. 10,000 to 60,000 gallons is actually our highest use for residential of 111 million gallons.
And I bet that's a lot of really inefficient irrigation.
I wouldn't argue with you about that.
And a lot of people watering a lot more often than they need to. So yeah, this is really useful. I think both for having the conversation about water rate changes, but I think this is really great to be having this as we're moving forward to do the new plan revisions, because this to me strikes me as a really relevant way of helping people understand, hey, you can spend less if you get a little more efficient on what you're doing. So this is helpful. Thanks.
Yeah, Chuck, thank you, Carl. Chuck, I would, we were talking about the water conservation plan and how we have to update it sometime in 2021. So many of the documents that you've referenced here, or this sheet that you've shared right here, is great information, and I can see it being a important part of our updated water conservation report. So I mentioned this to you once before, and I know you guys are busy, Chuck. I'm not complaining, mind you. But it would be nice, at least if council, for example, and these guys on the water board, if you had a shared folder someplace that we could all access at some point down the line to get into, the engineering stuff, water distribution, sewer distribution. You've had maps of where pipes lay and and this kind of stuff. I mean, because it would make updating that water conservation plan report, it would give us this nice vault, as it were, of great documents.
Right. Yeah. And I was watching the meeting earlier on YouTube, and I knew that some of this information there. And right now, the adopted water distribution plan is on our website. And once this is a draft, this document here, and the other one is certainly that information. We'll do everything to make that available. But I agree that this is some good information for the water conservation plan. And here's just to elaborate. This is in 2019 for the commercial in the city, the 50,000 plus gallons per month, tier 5, is the large user of 140. That's the largest between the commercial and the residential. It's probably not a surprise.
And I'm sure somebody's working on this, but do you have just a kind of a ballpark figure? Say, if by some miracle the citizens all said, "Gee, $23 is great with me," what would that do to your $94,000 deficit? I mean, how hard is it going to be to work down to a good level of debt for the city?
I think that's the perfect segue, Denver, if I may.
Okay.
Back to the next slide. So working with Zions Bank, it wasn't just me, it was our finance director, city manager, Carly. We've all worked with them and talked about options and refining and looking at all this data. So in this draft report, this isn't to say that these are the only options, as these people are Excel spreadsheet masters. Mike, you're good, and Mark Jolison's good, but these guys are masters of the trade with these Excel spreadsheets. So there's other options that could certainly be looked at, but these are the 5 that we as kind of the work group agreed would give a range, if you will. And
I've got a blue screen here, Chuck. I don't have anything on here.
yeah, I'm about to.
Okay. I'll shut up.
Sorry. It's going to get wordy here in a minute, and I wanted you to know why we did this.
Got it.
So option 1, rates would be increased, and I'll have a table here as a follow-up to all these words that you'll be able to see this in a tabular form. Under option 1, rates would be increased once in 2021 to a rate that would sustain the water fund for the next 10 years. To achieve this, all rates, meaning base and usage, those tiers, would increase by approximately 110%, resulting in a monthly base rate for residential customers in the city increasing to $21, and a one-time 110% increase for all the usage rates, which are the tiers. Then there would be a $5 million bond in 2020 and a $3.5 million bond in 2023 to help pay for those capital expenses. So some of this money would go to debt service, is what we're saying, and some would go to operational. And this option is kind of the takes care of everything option. It may be too extreme, so we looked at other options. Option 2, rates, both base and usage, would be increased beginning in 2021 by 75% and would increase again by 15% in 2022. So instead of 110% hit in option 1, it's a 75% increase soon, next year. Then there would be a need to be a 3% increase per year thereafter until 2026. City would still need to issue a $5 million bond in 2020 and a $3.5 million bond in 2023 to maintain financial stability. Option 3, capital expenses have been reduced by 14%. So that's just saying, well, here's our list of $15 million that I showed you earlier of what our needs are, but we're not going to get all that, so we cut it down to 86%. So the expenses are less.
How does that work to actually get this stuff done, though?
Well, it doesn't.
Okay.
It's a way. You hope that you get 86% of it done. You don't get 100% of it done. Is what it means is, we're trying to come up with, variable ways to look at it. This cut would allow for rates to be increased once in 2021 to a rate of $20. This would include a $4.5 million bond in 2020 and a $2.75 million bond in 2023 to help pay for capital expenses. And I've only got 5 options here, so if you bear with me. Under option 4, capital expenses have been reduced by 50%. So instead of the $15 million, it's down to $7.5 million. Which, you know, one way to look at that is it gets us 2 wells in the tank, but no pipe replacement. Or it gets us pipe replacement and no wells and no storage tank. Those numbers are about that. In this scenario, rates would be increased by 42% in 2021 and would increase again in 2022 by an additional 15%. There would be a final increase in 2023 of 10%. The schedule would increase the base rate for residential customers within the city to $18 in 2023. The city would still need to issue a $3 million bond in 2021 and a $1.7 million bond in 2023. Again, the key here was cutting the capital expenses in half, only doing half of what we need to do. In option 5, Denver, I think this was part of the question you asked me earlier, only considers a rate increase to cover operating costs. No capital expenses at all. We're not going to fix the system. We're just going to make sure we can operate the system. In this option, rates would be increased beginning in 2021 by 10%. It would increase by 3% per year thereafter. The city would not have the financial ability to complete any of its capital projects. So what this looks like in a table, this is option 1 here. The monthly rate today is $10. 2021, it would go up to $21 and stay that way till 2026. The other, that's for monthly rates. The other parameter here that we have is cash on hand. Call it a rainy day fund, if you will, but ideally we should have 180 days or 6 months of money in the bank to operate the system. That's, in my 30 years experience in government, it varies between 4 and 6 months is what utilities try and have in hand, again, to address things like workers not being able to work because of viruses or earthquakes or catastrophic failures. And right now, with us operating in the deficit of $54,000, we don't have any money in the bank, in the water fund. So this would allow us to have, with 180 days being the minimum, we have cash in the bank. And that money can be spent if we said, well, we only need 180, but it was a parameter that I wanted to show you that not only do these rates reflect our capital expenditures, ability to address capital, it also addresses our ability to address operational systems. Option 2, today we're at $10. We'd raise in 2021 to $17.50. 2022 goes up to $20.15. This is the incremental increases every year until we peak out in 2025 at $22, and then it remains the same. Option 3, which was we only do 86% of the capital projects in the next 10 years. We started, here we are at 10 today. We go to 20 and stay at 20. And you know, this part of the interesting thing about that is, to me, is up here, if we did 21, we can address the 100% of the capital projects. And if we drop $1 per month off, we'd lose 14%. One way to look at it.
Quick question, Chuck.
Yeah.
So there's still a tiered rate on top of this. This is just changing the base rate, but then there's still a usage fee for gallons used over a certain amount, correct?
That's right. And I know I went through those options kind of quickly, but the first 3, most of these options increase the usage rates also.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
So Chuck, I got a question, if I may.
Sure.
Well, first of all, my observation is option 5 is, as far as I'm concerned, is a non-starter. It doesn't buy you anything. I mean, you start off by showing how we badly need to replace old pipe. And if we can't replace most of the old bad pipe, why are we doing all this? So, but the other question I have for you in particular, I love the Zion's Bank table, but just thinking again about pushback from residents who are living on fixed incomes, can anyone point to another community in Utah, for example, whose water rates are comparable to ourselves and somehow manage to be getting by? They're in a better situation. In other words, can anybody say, well, you guys just did it. If you just did it like city XYZ, we wouldn't have this problem. Does such a city exist? I mean, I didn't see it in that table. And if that's the case, and this is going to be an easy sales job, I mean, you got to ante up or the whole thing is going to break you on you and it's going to get worse. So is there another city that they could point to that says, hey, we're not doing it right?
They have a database from studies that they did, and they don't have every city in the state.
Yeah.
That's why this week when I got their list, I thought, well, what's not only near us, but what's kind of comparable size? I think we'd have to. There's about 250 cities in the state, more or less, and we'd have to do some more research on that. Some of it's available by the internet, so we could narrow it down to cities of 5,000 that sometimes are really cities of 35,000, right? And we have our system that's designed to address that. So I think what you're saying is we should do some more research on other comparable sized cities with the similar rate and find out if there are other low rates out there.
Yeah, that'd be a good defense. Otherwise, your spreadsheet, I mean, I'm looking really hard to see any plausible defense for our exceptionally low water rates, and I didn't see it in that table, and it'll make it an easier sales job. But somebody may ask if there's somebody else out there. So yeah, a little more research would be great if you got time.
And I think that's a really important point for making sure you're able to say we didn't cherry pick just the highest rates in the state.
Yeah.
Well, you're right, but you remember we did see some that were Layton was 1285.
Right.
I did not totally analyze their tier rates. It's because some places, what I've noticed is they'll have a lower base rate, but then they'll have higher usage rates. The conservation fee that we talked about last time. Where was I? Did I get through all of this? I guess 50% projects.
Yeah.
And then the operational cost, you see, we'd still need to increase it to $11, but it doesn't get anything done except.
Denver's got a question. You need to unmute yourself though, Denver. You can just hit the space bar temporarily.
Oh, okay. Chuck, this is going to sound like a dumb question, but if you got together with 10 of the smartest, most experienced engineers that you knew, and you gave them all the choice, they can either they can fix the capital expenses, they can make the new tanks and all that, or they can fix the pipes. So basically you either fix your system and wait for the pipes to break, or you fix the pipes and hope the system will handle it. What seems to be the more pressing issue to you, that we get these pipes replaced, or that we get the new tanks and the new distribution system from them built?
It's not a dumb question, and I hope you don't think this is a dumb answer. If I had to do it, we need at least one new well. So I wouldn't make it. I said earlier, think about it one way as we do the wells and the tanks, and the other way is the pipes. We really sat down, if that's what the parameter that I was given the boundary conditions to work with. I think we need a new well. Fire flows, we need a tank, but some of this system is so old. We have lead joints in some of our pipes that need to go away. Those systems, I think it would be at least one new well, and then work with Levi and his crews and the information we have in our GIS system, and figure out what percentage of the pipes we be the highest priority ones.
Okay, we're getting close to the end of our meeting time, but Arnie has a question.
Hey, Chuck, I could be very well mistaken, but I was kind of hoping that some of the larger items on your expenditure list, we might be able to get money from the Community Impact Board for.
Well,
Like the 2 million gallon tank was a 2.2 million gallon tank and things like that, and the new well.
well, the well's not so, I won't use the word easy. Yeah, we have an application ready to go for the drinking water board for a distribution tank. But when I talk to them, it's very competitive. And what they tell me is we're not giving away 100% funding on anything anymore. Almost all of these cost shares want between 40 and 50% local match. So yeah, that $3.4 million may go down to 1.8. I don't know, because we haven't submitted the application yet, but it won't go to zero. I'm pretty confident in working with the agencies. There's some grants that are out there, but I mean, you know grants better than I do, Arnie. There's always a local cost share, almost always.
Okay, so there is the possibility that some of the costs that we're talking about here could be, we could find other options for the funding, at least partial funding.
That's right. And that's what you do, is you try and address it as best you can. But here's the other thing about capital improvement programs for 10 years. Other things will come up.
Right. And you don't want to be relying on grant funding to do something. I mean, I would also think a funder wouldn't want to fund you if you're relying on their grant to do your thing and that you don't have the other things in place. So, okay.
That was the case with the wastewater plant. Our rates were too low and they weren't going to fund us until we raised them up.
Yeah, in fact, this information most of that I've been sharing with you today was from a grant that we got from the Drinking Water Board, because we went in 4 or 5 years ago to try and get a tank, and they said, well, you guys don't even have an adopted plan and you don't have a detailed analysis. So here's money to do that and then come back. And that's why we're getting ready to go back and apply. But my point was that this 10-year list is what we need now. But think about 5 years from now, something else may get added to the list that we don't know about today, because the system is still aging, still being used. And, you know, tires get worn out on the car, no matter how many times you replace them.
So since we're a little past the total meeting time at this point, when is this coming to council and what, oh, good. And you were to the end of it. Thank you. When is this coming to council, and what would be helpful for you to have the water board provide to maybe help out a little bit? And sorry for the disruption in the background.
Yeah, we're anticipating going to council on the 28th of April. And we're hopeful, Carly, based on my memory, we're talking about having a 1 hour work session to go over this. And we would have Zion, of course, it's going to be a Zoom, in all likelihood, it'll be a Zoom meeting, right? And Zion's Bank would be available for that meeting to answer more detailed questions. I saw that you agended it as a discussion and possible recommendation. I don't know if the board feels comfortable making recommendations or not, but I certainly think council would appreciate if you were willing to make a recommendation on the rate structure or certain goals, in my opinion, that you asked.
Is that something that you need before the 28th? Or would it be like, what's the timeline on this? Because I know I certainly have a comfort level with suggesting that it's not unreasonable to go with a pretty significant rate increase, but I guess I want to take the temperature of the board, but also, like, do you need that at this meeting, or can we do it at our next meeting?
If you're asking me, if the board felt comfortable to make a recommendation today, I think that would be valuable for us to have going to council on the 28th. If you're not comfortable, then we'll just.
Okay. So board members, what do you think? Do you have a comfort level with some kind of a recommendation to council at this point?
Can we go back to the main screen? You guys, I understand we need money for this stuff. I did attend a hour-long session on building base rates and setting up a tiered structure at one point in time. I am concerned that we're not tiering our product as much as we could, and the rate that you're actually suggesting at this point in time for a base rate in that first 2,000 gallons, I would prefer to see, instead of seeing across the board rate structure increases, a slightly smaller percentage increase in the base rate in the first 2,000 gallons and more significant increases in the tiers as you move up from there.
I agree.
So you're basically saying, Arnie, you'd rather see more of a rate increase that will also potentially facilitate conservation.
That, to some extent, yes, that is what I'm saying. I mean, maybe I'll rephrase that again. And the rate increase that he suggested for option number one is basically across the board rate increase. And what I'm suggesting is that I personally would prefer to see a smaller increase in the base rate and the 2,000 gallons, the first tier, and a larger increase in the tier 2 and tier 3, especially for commercial use.
And Chuck did mention that the other things did have some of those increases. I don't think he had the capacity to show us that today.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with across the board for commercial and or increasing their base rates. They can make that money back.
I guess what I'm asking though is, can we? Okay, I guess then the short answer is we probably can't give a recommendation today, is what I think I'm hearing, because apparently you're saying we need more information to provide a recommendation.
Well, Carl, let me throw out one real simple thing that may not be worth much. I agree with Arnie, first of all. It's also, I point out, a little easier sales job, and that most people see the base rate. Those are also the people who are going to protest the most, living on limited incomes. You guys know we got a COVID crisis here. A lot of people are out of work, blah, blah, blah. And I understand that. So if you could pass on the majority of it, once again, to commercial people and to heavy hitters, and that'd be great. The only other simplified recommendation I might offer that we might be able to talk about right now is I'm convinced that Chuck has presented, you know, not complete certainly, but gone a long way to advocating for the fact that we're way underpriced. All right, so I'm like it or not, I'm prepared to advocate for planning for the future and paying for it, and that's what it's going to take, and a substantial rate increase without saying anything more quantitative about what that might be. But 10% isn't going to cut it, okay?
So Jeremy or Denver, do you guys have anything to add that could get us towards a motion?
I agree with I'm just remembering that when they changed the way that they pick up your garbage and your recycling, there was an enormous, well, not enormous, there was a significant amount of discussion in the newspaper about people that lived on fixed income, that fixed income being Social Security. And I think this is going to be a real hard sell for the city council and the mayor. And I think it would help them if people knew that everybody's being asked to do something, but Arnie's phrase, the people that can make their money back are going to be asked to do more. I mean, I agree we need the money. I just feel I'm sorry for the politicians, because it's going to be real hard to convince people to do that. And I think the more that we could show that everybody's pitching in and the people that are making money off the water are pitching in more. That's my 2 cents.
So I think I want to add something. It seemed that from the water usage statistics there, and Cara made the comment that basically the current rate structure is just encouraging people to waste, the people who can afford it at least, encouraging them to just waste water on irrigation that they could save if they, conserve better and use better practices. So I think that to avoid the pushback from the community, I think if the rate structure was done the way Arnie and Mike were talking about, where you target the people who are wasting water, mostly who can afford it, then that's going to minimize the amount of abuse that the council has to hear.
So I'd just like to add, when I was looking at the rate structures that you saw there, Chuck, I didn't notice a big increase from tier 1 to tier 2 to tier 3 for Moab City, whereas I did see a bigger increase from tier 1 to tier 2 and tier 3 in some of the other cities. And that's where part of my comment is that I would like to see a larger increase, percentage increase in the tier 2 and tier 3, and a smaller increase in tier 1 and the base rate. And I think that if you, like Mike said, you can sell that a whole lot easier than across the board. Everybody's going to pay a lot.
So let's give Jeremy a minute to talk, because I think he had something to say too.
Sure.
Sorry, Jeremy.
No problem. I'm in agreement with most everybody to some degree. I think before I can make a motion or on board or even say yes or no, just need a little more clarity, like we said before, on information having to do with those secondary and tertiary tiers and what percentage of those rates are going up. Because I'm not adverse to the idea that we have $21, $22 as a base rate. But yeah, the corollary with the larger water users, particularly Chuck, when you pointed out that it was group 3 or tier 3 ended up being the highest water user, we're going to make more bang for our buck. And if in the future those users go down, then we can raise the base rate as kind of the next step, if need be. So I just would need a little more information before I can make a motion today. But like Mike said, I'm not averse to everyone's rate going up to some degree.
Chuck, would it be worth, excuse me, Jeremy, would it be worthwhile, Carl, would you agree, makes this kind of generalized motion? The problem is we're not going to meet again before Chuck goes to council.
So what I was going to suggest, if it seemed that Chuck could get something to us that we could review, would people be open, since Zoom is a little easier to do than an anchor point meeting? Could we try to have another short meeting with only this on the agenda, a special meeting in effect, either next Wednesday or Wednesday the 22nd? Is that something, would that be feasible, Carly? And would that maybe be helpful so we could have a little more oomph to what we might be recommending?
So Wednesday the 22nd is probably taken up with another committee that we're starting for some UDOT hotspot funding. We're supporting that. So I'm trying to think in terms of, I want to hear Chuck's availability to get something by, it would be by the end of the week if we were to have a meeting on the 15th.
That feasible, Chuck, or not so much? You're muted.
Yeah, hey, I'm sorry, Carl. Let me try throwing this out. I agree it's a little more qualitative than you may like, but I could make a motion just to simply.
I really need to go soon, so we need to wrap this up in the next 10 minutes, okay?
I understand it. We can do that, but consider this. I can make a motion to say that the water board recommends the city engineers proposed rate schedules with the modification of somewhat lower base and tier 1 rates and higher tier 2 and tier 3 rates, without being more specific than that.
My only issue with that at this point is I would personally feel better seeing what that would do to the numbers, because I don't want to be suggesting something that then still leaves us down in option 4 or 5 territory. That's I guess my biggest concern.
May I suggest something quickly, Carl? With Mike's motion, if Mike makes that motion, what I would take that is a boundary condition that we've shown you these 5 options. Within the context of achieving the goals of the 5 options, I could go into option 1 and we could manipulate it by lowering the base rate from $21 to, I'm going to just pick a number, $17, and then adjusting the tiers 2 and 3 to see if we can achieve the same revenues that we need to address the issue.
So if the motion that Mike suggested gives you some good guidelines that you can then use, I'm all for it.
And I would second the motion if that's the case.
Okay, does that count as a motion, or do we need to re-say it?
Yeah, was that a motion?
I have written down that Mike Duncan moved to have the water board recommend the city engineer's proposed rate structure with a modification to lower the base of tier 1 and increase the bases of tier 2 and tier 3.
And I might suggest a further amendment that to recommend the city engineers option 1 first and foremost, and I would add, I would accept tier 2 as a modest compromise, and not tier 2, option 2 as a modest compromise. I'm thinking about trying to sell this, guys, and I'm trying to stay away from extremes on either side. I don't know if you guys would accept that or not.
Does that kind of meet what you were talking about, Chuck, where that gives you some latitude, but also some direction? Yep. Does that, Denver, and I can't see you right now, Denver, so you'll have to speak up. Does that sit okay with others on the board?
The only thing I didn't hear was when you talked about tier 1, was the word base rate in there also?
Yeah.
Yes.
It was?
Yep.
Okay.
And I got to say, Summer, you're amazing. Okay, so if that counts as a motion, if people are comfortable with that, do we have a second?
Yeah, I'll second.
Jeremy seconded.
Okay, sorry. You still seconded. All right, we have a motion and a second. Do we have further discussion? Seeing none, Summer, we need to do a roll call vote.
We will roll call again. Cora.
Yes.
Mike.
Aye.
Jeremy.
Aye.
Denver.
I don't know. My internet went down for about 3 minutes, so I don't know.
You're back.
What are we voting on?
So what we did, Denver, is Mike made a motion that Summer has captured, I think, pretty well, so she can say it real quick, that will allow Chuck to have some direction from us saying we support a fairly substantial rate increase, but what we're wanting is something that has the base rate increase be more modest and use more tier 2 and 3 rate increases to make up the slack.
Aye. Yes, I'm sorry about my internet.
Thanks, Denver. Arnie? You're muted.
Aye.
Aye. You are aye?
Yep.
So the motion.
Kara, you're muted.
Now I'm muted.
No.
Oh, I see. Wow. So the space bar is magic. Okay, so if that's if the motion carries, then I think we're done with that one, are we?
Nobody asked me.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Aye.
You were second on the list. You said aye.
Aye. That was Mike. Aye, please.
Okay. So moving forward then, I guess that takes us to a place, and maybe what we could do is have this item on the agenda more as just an update to us at the next meeting. And then if there's anything further we could do, is that something that could be helpful to do?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I'd make a motion to adjourn, Cara.
You don't even need a motion to adjourn. We can just adjourn. I was listening to the last council meeting and learned, and I thought that was true, but all right, I think we're done then. Carly and I will work on a agenda for the next meeting. If you guys have anything you particularly are interested in having on there, I think in light of the challenges going on right now, maybe just shoot an email to Carly and I with any of those kind of suggestions, and then she and I can get together via telephone or something and come up with what should be on the next agenda. I think we have a couple items from this meeting that will be, but if there's other things that are burning issues for you guys, other than going into more detail on the conservation plan revision, and then also we'll make sure that PowerPoint goes out to everyone so we can be more prepared for that, and then we can move on. Does that work for folks?
So how will the results of the last motion be communicated to the council?
They will be it's a recommendation from this body to the council, correct? That's what I believe I understood it to be.
I think we can, during the presentation to the council of the water rates, the proposed water rates, Chuck or Zion's Public Finance, whoever is giving the presentation, can relay and say this was the recommendation of the board. It'll be part of that presentation.
Okay.
And I can second that at that meeting.
Yeah, and it's helpful because Mike can provide an update and the perspective of the water board, so that will be that'll be useful.
Would it be helpful for anyone from the water board to try to attend that meeting as well somehow? Or with this process, that seems a little harder than normal.
I will let the mayor know that someone might be available, maybe Kara, I think it's or the vice chair if you're not available, just Jeremy, and just say, if we want, we could have you in the waiting room, and if they would like to hear from you, I'll run it by the mayor and see what she has to say.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much, all of you.
Thank you all so much.
Jack
Yep.
Carly.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.